Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a really powerful first-hand account, The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. It's more than just history, isn't it? It's a window into a life under intense pressure.
It really is. This diary, written between, June 42 and August 44, it just drops you right into the reality for Jewish families during the Nazi occupation in the Netherlands. A very personal story against this huge, catastrophic backdrop.
And it starts, kind of ironically, with something so normal. Anne getting a diary for her 13th birthday. She couldn't have possibly known it would become, well, the only place she could really pour out her thoughts so soon after.
No, exactly. The trigger, the thing that really pushed them into hiding, was the call-up notice for her older sister, Margot. That was basically an order to report for forced labor, a terrifying prospect.
Absolutely terrifying.
So, to avoid that, the Franks made this incredibly brave, but also incredibly difficult decision to hide. In that secret annex, behind Otto Frank's business premises in Amsterdam.
Just imagine that shift. One day you're, a teenager living your life. The next, you're confined, hidden away, everything depending on secrecy. And not just the Franks.
Right. They shared that space, that very small space with the Van Pels family, and then Fritz Pfeffer joined them later. 8 people, living with that constant fear.
So our goal for this deep dive, really, is to get into Anne's own words.
Yeah.
Explore what daily life was really like in the annex. See how she grew up so fast under those conditions, and wrestle with her thoughts on humanity, on hope in such dark times.
Yeah, let's try and unpack that. What was daily life like?
Okay, yeah. Life in the annex. 8 people, cramped conditions, always needing to stay hidden. The lack of privacy alone must have been, well, immense.
Immense. Think about just the practicality. So little space, resources getting scarcer, and that constant worry that any noise could give them away. She writes about it, doesn't she? The absolute silence needed during the day when the business downstairs was operating.
Every creak, every whisper.
Exactly. Everything had to be so controlled. And then just getting basic things, food supplies, that must have been a huge daily stress. They were completely dependent on others.
Which brings us to those helpers. Miep Gies, Johannes Kleiman, Victor Kugler, Bev Vosgeil. Their bravery is just astounding.
Truly remarkable. These people risked everything, their own lives, to bring food, news, books, just that connection to the outside world. It really highlights, incredible human decency right alongside terrible cruelty.
And somehow, amidst all that fear and restriction, life had to go on in some way. They filled their days, didn't they? Studying, reading.
And writing, especially for Anne writing.
Yes.
And these weren't just distractions. They were ways to keep their minds active, maybe hold on to some hope for the future. For Anne, writing was more than just an outlet. It was processing everything, trying to understand, trying to preserve her own self.
That leads perfectly into her coming-of-age story within those walls. The diary shows this incredible transformation from a young girl into this really thoughtful adolescent under pressure cooker conditions.
You absolutely see that evolution in the entries. Her early writing feels quite typical for a young teen, maybe focused on friendships, school crushes, that sort of thing. But as time goes on, wow. Her self-awareness deepens, her understanding of the world just expands dramatically.
And her relationships within the annex.
Yeah, she writes with such honesty. Her relationship with her mother, for example, sometimes quite strange. She doesn't shy away from that. And then that really close bond she clearly felt with her father.
And then there's Peter Van Pels. In that kind of intense, confined environment, you see this sort of tentative romance bloom in the diary.
It really underscores that basic human need for connection, for intimacy, doesn't it? Even when everything else is falling apart.
It really does.
And beyond the personal, you see this huge intellectual growth. She's grappling with big philosophical ideas, analyzing the war news they get, forming her own opinions. She was sharp, really observant.
It's also so poignant reading about her dreams, her aspirations, wanting to be a writer, a journalist. It wasn't just a kid's fancy, was it? It feels like something that really sustained her.
Oh, absolutely. The act of writing itself, in that context, feels like defiance, like hope. She took it seriously, even revising her work sometimes. She wasn't just keeping a diary. She was honing a craft, even then.
Which brings us to her wider reflections. It's not just personal. She thinks about human nature, about the war itself. This is where, for me, it gets incredibly profound. A young person facing that, thinking about good and evil.
Yes, and she doesn't flinch. She looks at the cruelty she knows is happening, but also the kindness she sees from the helpers. And somehow, despite everything, she holds on to this belief, this idea that people are fundamentally good. You have to ask, is that idealism, or is it this incredible act of resilience, a refusal to just give in to despair?
Is powerful. And you see her processing the war news, the ups and downs of hope and fear as they heard about the Allied progress.
Definitely. And her thoughts on anti-Semitism, on prejudice, written from the perspective of someone living through its most horrific consequences. It gives such a human face to that kind of hatred.
The diary also feels like such an intimate space. You call it Kitty, right? Like a friend. And she talks about her inner and outer self. What did that tell us?
I think it shows her awareness, even then, of the difference between the face she might put on for the others in the annex, maybe trying to be cheerful or brave, and the complex storm of thoughts and feelings inside. The diary was the one place she could be completely, utterly herself. No judgment.
Dealing with all the normal teenage stuff,
Yeah.
identity, self-worth, but under this insane pressure, wanting to be understood.
That desire to be understood just jumps off the page. She's figuring out who she is in a situation where her very existence is constantly threatened. Her inner strength, her determination to be someone, despite it all, it's incredible.
And there's that constant tension, isn't there, between her optimism, that belief in goodness, and the grim reality she was living day to day.
That's key. That tension is the power of the diary, in many ways. She clings to hope, to the idea of a future, a better world, even surrounded by darkness. The diary captures that struggle, that resilience. And as we said, her writing just gets stronger and stronger through it all.
So let's look at some key moments the diary marks. We know she got it June 12th, 1942. What other dates stand out as markers in the timeline?
Well, the big one is Margot's call-up notice, July 5th, 1942. That's what forced them into hiding the very next day, July 6th. Then, just a week later, July 13th, the Van Pels family arrives. The space gets even tighter.
And Fritz Pfeffer.
He arrived later that year, November 16th, 1942. That completed the group of 8.
And the diary reflects the worsening conditions as time went on, right? 1943. Food getting scarcer, tensions rising.
Definitely. You read about the increasing hardships, the fraying nerves, but also, as you said, that's when Anne's writing really starts to mature. By 1944, her reflections are incredibly deep.
And then a glimmer of hope. D-Day, June 6th, 1944.
Yes. You can feel the excitement, the hope in the annex when they hear that news. Liberation finally seemed possible, maybe even close.
But it wasn't to be. Her last entry is August 1st, 1944, just days later.
Just 3 days later. August 4th, 1944. The historical record is clear. The annex was discovered. Betrayed, most likely, though we still don't know for sure by whom. All 8 were arrested.
And from there, the path is just heartbreakingly grim.
It is. They were sent first to Westerbork, the transit camp in the Netherlands. Then, in September 1944, deported to Auschwitz.
The fate of Anne and Margot specifically.
They were later separated from their parents and transferred to Bergen-Belsen concentration camp. Both Anne and Margot died there, likely from typhus, probably in February or March 1945. Just weeks, tragically, before the camp was liberated. Otto Frank, their father, was the only one of the 8 to survive the camps.
It's almost unbearable to think about. But the diary itself survived.
Yes. Miraculously, almost. After the arrest, Miep Gies went back to the annex and found Anne's notebooks and papers scattered on the floor. She gathered them up and kept them safe, unread. When Otto Frank returned after the war, the only survivor, Miep gave the diary to him.
And he decided to publish it.
He did. He fulfilled the wish Anne herself had expressed in the diary. She'd heard a broadcast encouraging people to keep records of their wartime experiences, and she actually started editing her diary with an eye towards future publication. He published it in 1947.
And its impact since then has just been monumental. It's become such a vital piece of Holocaust education.
Absolutely essential. It's a primary source, yes, but it does something statistics can never do. It gives a human face, a relatable voice to unimaginable suffering. It makes the Holocaust personal.
And you can't read it without recognizing her talent as a writer, even putting the circumstances aside for a moment. It's literature as well as history.
Definitely. Her observations, her honesty, her developing style, it's remarkable for any writer, let alone a teenager under those conditions. And that spirit, that optimism we talked about, even facing the worst, just continues to resonate, doesn't it?
Across the world. Translated into, what, over 70 languages? Adapted so many times.
It's incredible. It really ensured Anne wasn't just a number, one of the 6 million. She became an individual voice, heard globally. The Anne Frank House in Amsterdam continues that work, too. Education, promoting tolerance.
And that famous line, I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are truly good at heart. Knowing what happened, It's just incredibly powerful. Such resilience.
It really is. She didn't live to see her dream realized in her lifetime, the dream of being a writer. But, through the diary's publication, through its millions of readers, her voice endures. She achieved it posthumously in a way she could never have imagined.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into The Diary of a Young Girl, a book that really stays with you.
It certainly does. And it makes you think, doesn't it? How does this intensely personal story, ending so tragically, still shape how we understand history, how we think about human resilience? And maybe, what does it tell us about the power, the absolute necessity of listening to these individual voices from the past, especially those that were almost silenced? Something to keep reflecting on.